Alberta, the land of vast prairies, rocky mountains, frigid winters, and beautiful lakes. But Alberta is usually known for something a little less easy on the eyes: oil. This single province contains the third largest oil reserves on the planet, and they use a lot of it. Every day, more than 3.5 million barrels of oil are extracted from their vast oil supply, fueling our cars and their economy. Today, we'll peel back the layer and examine Alberta's energy and plan for the future.
According to the Canadian Revenue Agency, over 80% of Canadian oil is sourced in Alberta. Oil accounts for 45% of Alberta's energy production. This map shows all the natural gas pipelines in Alberta. All maps used have been produced by the Canadian Energy Regulator. Another huge resource Alberta uses for energy is coal. About 45% of Albertan energy is supplied by coal. Alberta does use some renewable energy, however, with 5% coming from the wind, 3% coming from hydroelectric stations, and 2% coming from various other sources. Alberta's energy sector employs over 140,000 people all across the country. The largest power plant is the Sundance Power Station, a coal-powered plant which is located near Edmonton. It produces 2,141 megawatts of power, which alone is enough to power 2.1 million homes. Other fossil fuel generators are located around Calgary, Red Deer, Fort McMurray, and Fort Saskatchewan, as well as many smaller communities. Renewable energy in Alberta is a different story. The largest of these generators, the Brazeau Hydroelectric Dam, is a major source of power, producing 355 megawatts. And while some biomass, wind, and solar farms can produce up to 100 megawatts, renewable energy does not contribute a significant proportion of energy to the province as a whole.
Alberta runs a huge energy surplus. Oil provides the Albertan government with between $1 to $6 billion of direct revenue in the form of royalties. Over 99% of exported oil flows to the United States. Some of Alberta's surplus energy is also directed to other provinces to cover energy deficits. The most important limitation on renewable energy in Alberta is cost. Fossil fuels provide Alberta with a huge energy surplus and jobs for tens of thousands, although it also creates a huge dent in the health of the globe. All of this pollution isn't reusable and places many challenges on the environment. While Alberta's economy benefits and Albertan society is enhanced because of the access to jobs and cheap energy, Albertan society is also hampered by the massive CO2 output. Their environment is also being harmed, directly by habitat destruction and indirectly by the imminent threat of climate change. The impacts of climate change will change the lifestyle of all Albertans. It affects their agriculture by making the growing process slower, many of the crops dying in the process. Climate change also affects the frequency of extreme weather events. Droughts, forest fires, and severe storms are increasing and causing damage to properties and the environment.
Alberta may be economically dependent on its vast oil reserves, but it isn't necessarily dependent on oil to meet its energy needs. Alberta produces 16,582 megawatts of power in total, while it consumes only 10,850 during its heaviest consumption periods. Renewable energy has been implemented on some scale, but Alberta has yet to take steps to phase out its coal boilers, which provides a cheap, job-producing energy source for Albertans. One of the main ways Alberta could replace its coal is nuclear energy, which provides Ontario with the majority of its energy. Nuclear energy is clean and would provide Alberta with a stable, efficient energy source. However, building a nuclear reactor is expensive and could be catastrophic if something goes wrong. Nuclear waste would have to be buried somewhere, and the improper handling of it could lead to a major environmental impact that harms wildlife, nature, and communities.
Alberta's renewable electricity program, which is set to be completed by mid-2021, turns the province to face the wind. The first round of results is almost entirely in operation and will provide Alberta with an additional 500 megawatts of clean wind energy. The second round of construction will add an additional 360 megawatts of renewable energy in partnership with several First Nations groups. The third round is slated to add 400 megawatts of clean energy. Alberta has opportunities to become dependent on clean, sustainable energy for the majority of their energy needs, but they have limited opportunities to cut fossil fuels from their economic engine.
The government of Alberta does have a plan for the future of their energy. They plan to cut the carbon tax and build pipelines. However, They want to have emissions targets in place for the largest carbon-contributing power plants, with the goal of reducing carbon emissions 10% per year. The alternative plan proposed by the NDP would be to broaden the carbon tax and replace pipelines with rail lines. To help the economy, they want to diversify Alberta's oil and gas reliance and introduce cheaper renewable energy to compete with fossil fuels.
The current government of Alberta will work out an action plan going forward. Their plan does not address an important question in the future of Albertan energy. How will Alberta phase out of fossil fuels? The government of Alberta has stated that its goal is to be 30% renewable energy by 2030. But is this enough? According to projections, Canada will fall short of its Paris Climate Agreement target by a significant amount if Alberta fails to phase out of its huge fossil fuel industry. However, the United Conservative Party of Alberta is against any type of carbon tax and has even taken the federal government to court to fight the federal carbon tax. What will happen if Alberta fails to reduce carbon emission? Alberta is still the largest producer of greenhouse gases in Canada, despite only being the fourth largest province by area and population. It is certain that if Alberta fails to begin to decrease net carbon emission before 2030, Canada will not meet its climate change goal that they pledged to uphold. This could be a disaster in the fight against the climate catastrophe our world is facing.
In 2014, the price of oil plummeted. This drop saw Alberta's oil royalties drop from $6 billion to under $1 billion. How will Alberta stabilize their economy when the price of oil could plummet at any time? The more dependent Alberta is on oil for their energy, jobs, and government, the more susceptible they are to economic collapse should oil become too inexpensive. Their government has not addressed this dependency, and in fact, has doubled down on the black gold to support their growing economy.
What will happen to Alberta's economy in the future when the world moves on from dependence on oil? Gas guzzling cars are becoming electric vehicles. British Columbia and Quebec depend almost entirely on hydroelectricity. Wind technology is improving, solar panel technology is improving. Everything is pointing towards a future less dependent on fossil fuels. Even if Alberta phases out of coal entirely and becomes dependent on renewables for their energy needs, they are still dependent on oil exports for their economic needs.
Finally, what happens when oil runs out? At the current rate of production and economic dependency, as drilling technology improves, Alberta will extract oil at an increased rate, increasing carbon emissions and depleting oil reserves. Oil won't run out in the next 10, 20, or 30 years. But long-term, Alberta's government has not addressed the issue of energy and economic diversification. The government should address this because failure to do so means Alberta could be less economically stable. Failure to diversify means increasing carbon emissions at a time where drastic decreases are required.
Sometimes, the hard questions illuminate the most about our future. As the global climate continues to change, no other province is at the forefront of Canada's energy more than Alberta. Pipeline politics, carbon taxes, and buzzwords sweep the political landscape, but it's important to scale back and look at the bigger picture. Alberta's energy is important, and it affects all of Canada.